Hi, I'm Theo, and these broadcasts are to support the blogs on nomoreshee.com's website as well as the online classes. In this episode, part 3 of our prophecy series, Prophecy is Later? Welcome back to the No More She broadcast, where we continue our series on prophecy in part 3 when we look at one aspect of prophecy being later. Thanks for joining. You know, there's so many cultures that have narratives, accounts about the flood. So then what does that imply? And what is the biblical author wanting to do? Because the biblical author is not the first text, as we often have tried to explain on this channel. The Bible comes late to the party. And that's important when you understand prophecy. And if prophecy merely is predictive, and some people, as we've said in previous broadcasts, that some people have erroneously thought that Hebrew was the first language ever spoken by Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And there's no evidence for that. All of the evidence points otherwise. Hebrew is much later language. It comes much later in the Semitic fields, and you can study it out, and it comes much later. All the evidence points to the otherwise. It's not the earliest. It's much later. Abraham is the first Hebrew in a sense, and he comes much later to the ancient Near Eastern culture. He's much later to the party. And God doesn't form the people of Israel until the time of Moses. And it's a mixed multitude. We talked about that on the channel. So it's all kinds of people. And so they're trafficking in so many different cultures and so many things. And they're trying to speak God's revelation in that culture. And it's like the world today using the internet, and all these people are trying to speak, and there's all these hashtags, and everyone's got a voice, and they speak differently, and their cultures understand things differently. And so how do you bring all that together, and in what form? You know, it seems to be English is the big language, but will that always be the case going forward? It hasn't been the case in the past, obviously. And so when we're talking about these things and we're trying to understand, if we just think simplistically, simple thinking, prophecy, prediction, God said it would happen in centuries past, and it happens. And that's all it is. That's prophecy. Then we miss out because there's a whole lot more going on. There's things that they're discovering today about what we eat, that our brains are connected to our bowels, something that the ancient world understood. And modern people are starting to understand that what you eat and when you eat and how you eat and all these things and exercise and all these things affect your health and affect your bowels, and the kidneys are connected to the heart, and all this connected, and everything is so connected. And so you eat something, it causes you to do this, and you're thinking this, and it is amazing what all that we are learning, and yet people in the ancient world were not so stupid. They figured out a lot of the modern science without the aid of computers, and they could do mathematics, and they figured out things through their own methodology, and they were pretty smart. And so we have to understand, if we think prophecy is merely predictive, it's just the tip of the iceberg of what prophecy is. There's a whole lot underneath those waves that we're missing out on, and we have to be careful. And so this is where most people have to start when you teach anything about prophecy, is you have to open the eyes of students and open the eyes of people to understand that prophecy is much deeper, and it's tapping into these traditions. And it's like, these veins in the earth of gold, and you have to really mine and go deep to dig it out. Or it's like, as the Bible talks, and people that still People that still deal with bones. Okay, I know in the modern Western world, places like KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, can no longer traffic in bones because people are not interested in the bones. They just want the meat. And yet there are other cultures that still today, I'm amazed because I've had someone over in Asia take a chicken and they gave me chicken feet soup. They take the feet of the chicken and they make soup out of it. And you drink the broth. I mean, they use every part of the animal. They eat all these parts that most people would not even think about eating. And maybe they do if they eat something like a hot dog or a sausage. And they don't know because it's all been ground up and it's in there. So they just want the meat. But to get to the marrow of the bone, and the marrow of the bone is where some people find the most flavor. And I've seen people that have wrestled with their food to get to the bones and get to the marrow and and it's so tasty, and they suck all that marrow out of the bone, and they're just they're going crazy and mad after that, just like a dog goes after the bone. And so there's something to that. And so there's much more underneath to prophecy than merely it's predictive. And because it's predictive and God said this and then later on it happens, then that means that Jesus is God, or that we can trust the Bible, and that's all that's going on there. And it's not. It's not. It's much deeper than that. That the Holy Spirit inspired this, and these works are so majestic, and there's a manifold beauty to all of this that goes above and beyond a simplistic reading of the text. And there's much more happening underneath. And so we have to be careful of reading the text at such a shallow, surface level reading that we've only scratched the very surface of what all is intended. And there's much hiding deep below that we're missing out on. And when we begin to grab all of those things, then that rich tradition that supports, that stands behind, and those threads that have been interwoven through the entire tapestry, those rhymes, those rhythms, those patterns, they resonate, they reverberate, and it's like dropping a stone in the water in Genesis chapter 1, and all of those ripples are still reverberating throughout from the rest of Genesis and the rest of the Pentateuch and the rest of the Hebrew scriptures all the way through to the New Testament period. And it's going to go on and beyond. And what Moses is doing is grabbing from what's backwards but pushing it forward so that Hosea can grab what Moses did and push it forward, so that Matthew can grab what Hosea did and push it forward, so that John in the Revelation can tell something amazing. And so all that's happening in such a wonderful level. And you have two streams even in scholarship of the prophetic and the apocalyptic to consider on top of all of this. And we want to grab into some of these things in future sessions. And so to help my students get more out of the text and to get to the marrow of the bone and to really understand what's going on underneath, I create this content to help them. And those who are part of our listenership can join in this journey in understanding how great this text is and what all it's trying to accomplish and achieve and what it's trying to do. Because if we get caught up in merely dating things, because that's a whole nother issue of when to date things, because you have to decide when was the prophecy originally spoken orally. Figure that out. And then when was it written down? And those are legitimate aspects of study that do need to happen, and those discussions do need to take place. But if those discussions are at the expense of the whole purpose, why does Matthew want? Why does the Holy Spirit want Matthew to grab and pluck that string of Egypt and the Exodus through Hosea? And why does that hashtag, why does the Holy Spirit want that hashtag in the readership, in the listenership? Those who are listening to Matthew's gospel being read, those who are reading it. Why does the Holy Spirit want what Hosea did with Exodus brought up concerning Jesus in Matthew's day? So all of those things need to be considered. And why is that taking place? And if we just get caught up in prophecy, prediction, and dates, and setting dates, and in arguing dates, we're going to lose this beauty. We're going to lose the perspective, because nobody in the ancient world is worried about whether or not a certain author who wrote which books of the Bible, when they were written, whether they were historical. And that's another thing. When we're talking about prophecy and poetry, how much of it is it literally to be accepted? Because most people are going to take Matthew 2:15 as taking these words from Hosea 11 verse 1. And these again are modern numerologies applied to the text that were not there previously. So we've only had the numbers of verse numbers and chapters relatively recently in the history of the reception of the text. So how much is Matthew wanting to grab? And if you're just going to focus on those few words, and that's all Matthew intends for his audience to grab, and that's the question when you get into whether or not a New Testament or anybody in the Bible, any author, any passage is echoing or alluding to or specifically citing. And why didn't Matthew just go back to Moses? Why did he go to Hosea? Because clearly, comparing the grammar, he's citing Hosea. So why does he cite Hosea? Why doesn't he just go back to Moses? So what's going on there? So all of that stuff makes it fascinating. So that when you cook, you put all these things together and cook them and lay them out on the table and you eat, and they all come together and make a meal. Your body needs all that stuff, but you choose whether you're following a Chinese recipe, you're following a Latino, a Mexican, a Spanish, an Italian, an American, an Asian, how you're going to do that, because everyone ultimately is taking carbohydrates and certain vitamins and minerals, and they're putting them together, and they're cooking them and preparing them in different ways. And there's different time involved factor, and different heat applied or no heat applied, or they're in a fridge for so many days or whatever. And so all of that. So how much, is going on behind the text that we're missing when we just think of prophecy only as mere prediction? We're missing so much else that's underneath the text, and it's so beautiful. And we want to begin to kind of take out that discussion that we began way back at the very beginning of this channel, and we want to begin to take apart some of that. And this is just an introduction to know that, yes, we're not saying that there is no prediction in prophecy. We're not excluding it, but we're including so many other things, that it's not just predictive, that there's other things happening. And when the prophets tend to speak in the scriptures, they're not just predicting, they're doing so much more. And more often, they're not predicting. They're not just telling ahead of time, foretelling. They're doing something either. They're coming late to the party. It's going to be interesting what that means. They're coming late to the party to then kind of say, okay, this is what this means now. So they're kind of letting everyone else have their say and say all the things that it could be, and then they're coming back and they're laying down, now this is what it is. And so that's interesting when you think about how late the biblical text is and how late the biblical, even the language of Hebrew, and how late it is and what's going on. It presents a lot of interesting things to consider that we need to consider when we approach the text. So I hope you enjoyed this, and we're going to hopefully pick this up and do some more with this. Thank you very much, and God bless you for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes in videos to help you with your journey from nomorec.com.